The flight deck is 95 millimeters of solid steel, and below the waterline, the belt armor runs up to 165 millimeters of hardened plate. The Taihō was the first Japanese carrier with an armored flight deck. Japanese carriers before her had traded protection for speed and offensive punch. After the losses at Midway, the requirement changed. Keep the flat top alive when American bombs start falling. And the answer, on paper, was steel where other carriers had wood, armor where other carriers had open galleries. Yet the thing that kills her is not the thing the armor was meant to stop. One hit is all it takes, and the chain reaction that follows is not triggered by the enemy at all. It is triggered by the ship's own systems and her own layout, by decisions made years earlier in drafting rooms thousands of miles from the battlefield. You can armor a flight deck and thicken a belt. You cannot weld shut the flaws that are already inside the hull, which raises the question at the center of this disaster. How does the most survivable carrier in the fleet go down from a single hit she was built to walk away from? That morning, June 19th, the Taihō is the flagship of the Japanese fleet, the most advanced carrier in the Imperial Navy, and Vice-Admiral Ozawa commands from her bridge as she prepares to launch her aircraft into the largest carrier engagement of the Pacific War, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The ship is brand new, commissioned barely 3 months earlier. Everything she was built to do, she is about to do for the first and last time. The Philippine Sea, June 19th, 1944. The water stretches flat and empty, but it's not empty. 15 American carriers and 9 Japanese are closing on each other. 24 flight decks in 1 square of ocean, more than any battle in history, and between them, over 1,300 aircraft. That's not a fleet. It's a moving air force that many machines in one stretch of water is the entire striking arm of 2 empires, turning toward each other. The man at the center of the Japanese side is Vice-Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa, who commands the carrier forces in the naval air war that's about to unspool across the Philippine Sea. He will end this war as the last commander-in-chief of the combined fleet. That the Navy is betting on him now tells you who they think can stop the bleeding. Ozawa isn't a paper tactician. He was the first to recommend massing the carriers into a single air fleet, the idea behind the Kido Butai that opened the war. He pushed the Navy to see carriers as the future, not battleships. Now the Empire's back is against a wall of American flat tops, and Ozawa gets the stage he argued for. The operation is called AGO, with a logic that is brutal and clear. Lure the US fleet into a trap, and destroy it. Planners expect the decisive action somewhere between the Palaus and the Western Carolines, and they've strung airfields along that arc. Land-based aircraft will hit the Americans first, bleeding the carrier decks before Ozawa's mobile fleet ever launches, and then his carriers deliver the knockout. It's layered, ambitious, but the whole plan assumes the enemy cooperates, that American reconnaissance is blind, that the US carriers will chase a decoy and leave the invasion beaches open. The trigger comes on June 15th, when American Marines storm onto Saipan, the first island of Japan's inner defense ring, a place that puts US bombers within reach of the home islands. The Imperial General Staff activates AGO, and Ozawa's force, centered on the new carrier Taihō, puts to sea. 9 carriers with cruisers and destroyers screening them make up the largest Japanese carrier formation in years. Ozawa plants his flag aboard her, and the fleet pushes east. And the Americans, Admiral Raymond Spruance commands the 5th Fleet, and the bones of the Japanese plan have already reached American hands. So he doesn't chase the decoy. He anchors his carriers to the beachhead and waits, with submarines fanned out ahead, and the trap is closing from both sides. Below, the hunting is already underway. American submarines have been shadowing Ozawa's force, feeding position reports back to Spruance, and they wait. But the real imbalance is in the cockpits, because the pre-war pilots, the men who turned carrier aviation into a weapon of surprise, they're dead. The replacements are young, rushed through abbreviated training. Push them through anti-aircraft fire and American fighters, and the gaps in their hours show. On the flag bridge, Ozawa reviews the final strike plan, out on a trackless ocean with half the world's carrier decks converging. On the morning of the 19th, Ozawa's fleet reaches its launch point. Search planes rumble off the catapults and vanish over the rim of the horizon, and a scout returns a sighting, the American task force. He gives the order. On Taihō's flight deck, the first wave lines up. Zeros, Judies, Jills, bombs slung under wings, torpedoes in their bellies, fuel tanks full. Up on the bridge, Ozawa watches the plan go into motion, and a periscope breaks the water. The USS Albacore has found the mobile fleet. 6 torpedoes slide from the tubes of the USS Albacore, running straight and fast beneath the surface. The submarine's commander, James Blanchard, has been stalking the mobile fleet for hours, and now the largest carrier silhouette he has ever seen fills the periscope lens. He sends all 6 into the water, every one of them aimed at Taihō. Above the fleet, Warrant Officer Sakio Komatsu is flying a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, launched minutes earlier with the strike. He may be the only pilot in the formation who sees the torpedo wakes. From altitude, the trails are hard to miss, and they are converging on the flagship. Komatsu breaks formation and puts the Judy into a dive at the nearest wake. He does not pull out, the aircraft hits the water just ahead of the torpedo's path, and the warhead detonates short of the carrier. 1 torpedo is gone. The rest run on past the churning plume, wakes hidden now, and the geometry closes on the starboard side of Taihō. The strike comes at 0745, just forward of the island, and the hit is not the crack of a magazine going up. It is a deep, percussive thud that hammers through the hull plates, carried by seawater into every compartment. As the warhead blows a hole below the waterline, the sea rushes in, floods the forward elevator well, jams the lift platform halfway between the flight deck and the hangar, and ruptures 2 aviation fuel tanks. Gasoline, lighter than water, forces its way upward through the flooding, mixing with fuel oil and salt water in a thick, volatile slurry that settles in the elevator pit. The carrier shudders and immediately takes on a slight bow trim, 1.5 meters by the bows, a small number that the damage control officers note and file. While on Albacore, Blanchard and his crew listen. They hear the first explosion, Komatsu's hit, then nothing for a few seconds. Then a deeper, more solid thud rolls through the water as they have a hit, but they have no way of knowing if it is fatal. On the bridge of Taihō, Admiral Ozawa asks for a situation report. Nothing breaks. The flight deck is untouched. No fire erupts, the engine rooms are intact, so the word comes back that the hit is manageable, and damage control teams move to shore up the flooded compartments and patch the hole. The elevator well is not pumped out. The immediate crisis is water, not vapor. Meanwhile, the carrier keeps launching aircraft. The second wave roars off the flight deck, and Ozawa's battle plan remains on schedule. The report is clean. No fires, no secondary explosions. But there is a thing you won't see in any damage report that morning. Below the waterline, aviation gasoline is leaking continuously from the ruptured tanks, pushed upward by seawater, and it is now forming a layer of vapor in the elevator well and the lower hangar. The hangar is an enclosed space with no natural ventilation, so the vapor has nowhere to go. It is invisible, and it is beginning to pool. The smell of fuel is normal on a carrier during flight operations, and for now, nobody treats what they are breathing as the emergency. The ship continues to steam at full speed as the battle rages, and on Taihō, the only visible evidence of the torpedo is a slight tilt and a jammed elevator. Everything else looks normal, and the invisible cloud grows, waiting for a spark. The elevator is jammed. 6 feet below the flight deck, the steel platform sits frozen in its shaft, and beneath it, in the darkness of the well, seawater and aviation gasoline are mixing into something that doesn't belong on any warship. The crew can smell it now, but the smell isn't the problem. The problem is what they do next. The forward elevator well is a shaft that drops straight through the heart of the ship, from the flight deck down past the hangars and into the lower hull. When the torpedo punched through the starboard side that morning, it flooded that space and cracked open 2 aviation fuel tanks sitting just below the waterline. The gasoline doesn't float on top in a neat layer you can skim off. It churns into the seawater and rises with every slosh and roll of the ship. You have, in effect, a fuel-air mixture brewing in a confined steel box, and a crew that has never faced one. Japanese damage control doctrine is good on paper, and the Imperial Navy drills its men in flooding control and in fighting fires. But Taihō is a new ship, and her crew hasn't had time to turn procedures into instinct. The men assigned to damage control are competent sailors, but they are not specialists. The carrier has pumps for the elevator well and a foam suppression system for the hangar. Neither is used on the well. It stays full, and the gasoline keeps bleeding into it. The first real decision comes from the damage control officer. The elevator is stuck 6 feet down, and the fumes are building in the hangar, and that hangar is enclosed. No windows, no hatches to the outside air, dependent entirely on mechanical fans to breathe. The orders go out to open the ventilation duct gates, every one of them, all through the upper and lower hangars, to create a draft that will pull the fumes up and out. But that draft doesn't go out. The duct gates open onto a network of steel channels branching from the hangars into compartments never designed to handle explosive vapor. Opening the gates doesn't exhaust the fumes into the Philippine Sea. It gives them a route into spaces that until this moment were clear. The damage control officer isn't finished, so he orders the aft elevator lowered, hoping to create even more airflow through the hangar. The aft elevator, unlike the forward one, still works. When it drops, it opens a hole between the hangar and the flight deck. So now you have a chimney, fumes rising from the flooded well through the hangar and up into the open air above. Some of the vapor does escape, but a great deal more of it spreads outward, pushed sideways by the draft into every corner of the hangar and beyond. And then someone smashes the portholes. That's the third thing. The order comes down to open every hatch, every scuttle, every opening that might help air move through the ship, and the crew takes hammers to the glass. Now outside air is pouring in, mixing with the gasoline mist, and the mixture is flowing through corridors and mess decks and machinery spaces. The concentration climbs, not fast enough to knock a man down, but steadily, and nobody aboard can measure it. Then comes the fourth and final order. The damage control officer tells the engineering crew to switch the general ventilation system to full capacity. Every fan and blower in the network runs at maximum, pushing air into every compartment on the vessel. The intent is to drive the fumes out, but the ventilation system does not isolate the hangar from the rest of the carrier. It connects them. The fans spin up, and the vapor-laden air from the hangar, instead of being exhausted overboard, is blasted through ductwork that runs behind bulkheads and under decks, past electrical panels and switchboards. The fumes reach compartments that had been sealed. They reach the machinery spaces where the generators are running. The ventilation roar is the sound of machinery doing its job. The air is moving, and near the vents, the smell thins. What has actually happened is that a fuel air charge has been distributed through most of the interior volume of the ship. The enclosed hangar was never a containment system. It was a starting point, and the vapor now has access to every spark the ship can offer. The fans are running. The vapor is spreading, and somewhere in the maze of compartments below the waterline, a generator keeps turning. By mid-morning, the forward elevator well is a soup of seawater and ruptured fuel. The crew drags wooden benches and mess tables across the flight deck and planks over the hole with whatever they can find, because flight operations have to continue. That's the priority. The gasoline doesn't gush. It seeps, a continuous, silent bleed from the cracked tanks into the flooded well. And there it mixes with the salt water and the bunker oil sloshing in the dark. In the warmth of that enclosed space, it vaporizes, and the vapor works its way up into the still air of the hangar. And here is where the design turns against the men inside it. The enclosure was deliberate, an armored box sealed against the outside. The only air that moves is the air the fans push. Inside that sealed hangar, the air does not turn over. It is hot, it is still, and it holds whatever is put into it. Then the smell starts to register, a wrong note under the familiar odors of the hangar, lubricant, solvent, a crowd of men working in close quarters. This one is sweeter and sharper. Raw gasoline in a closed room. What they are smelling is the hangar filling, cubic foot by cubic foot, with a fuel air charge. Some of the damage control crews recognize what's happening and try to pump out the flooded elevator well. The attempt fails. The foam sits unused, the suppression system is right there, and nobody turns it on the spreading slick. The training didn't stick, the drills weren't enough, and so the pool of fuel on the water remains. Men begin to slow down, and it is the air doing it. Gasoline vapor is a solvent. Breathe enough of it, and judgment and coordination go before anything else does. The fans are running, the duct gates are open, and the logic was to pull fresh air through. But there is no fresh air to pull. The ship is sealed, and the fans just stir the pot. Every space that shares a vent now shares the same air. By noon, the upper and lower hangar decks are full of mixed gas. It is no longer just a smell. It is an atmosphere, and it is heavy, sinking into the lower spaces, filling the corners, pooling where the men are working. Some of them are overcome by the fumes before a single flame touches them, and shipmates carry them to what they hope is better air. There is no better air. The panic is not loud. It is a quiet, spreading dread. The ship is still underway and Ozawa is still on the bridge, commanding his fleet. The aircraft are still being moved, fueled, armed, and the war above the waterline has its own momentum that pulls the men along with it. The planks over the forward elevator well are no seal. Gasoline continues to bleed into the water, the heat of the hangar keeps the evaporation rate high, the cloud grows denser with nowhere to go, and the fans keep turning. And somewhere below, the generators are running. The clock reads 14:30. Below the armored deck, a generator is still running, and the air in the hangar circulated through the ventilation since morning is no longer just air. It is a fuel-filled atmosphere rich enough to burn, waiting for a crack in the circuit. A contact opens, the arc jumps, and the ship stops being a ship. The explosion does not come from the torpedo wound, but from inside, forward, where the elevator well had become a sump of seawater and aviation gasoline, and the blast heaves the flight deck upward. Not a bomb hit, an internal rip that tears open the hangar sides, shatters piping, blows out the hull plates. The armored deck lifts like the lid of a drum that is finally overpressured. Every light fails, and the Taihō loses power and goes dead in the water. On the flag bridge, Admiral Ozawa has run the mobile fleet through the morning and launched his air groups expecting a decisive victory. Now his flagship is burning, and he tells his staff he will stay and go down with the ship. The tradition demands it, but his officers do not give him that option. They talk him out of it and move him down across the listing deck into a boat, and he transfers his flag to the cruiser Haguro, then to the destroyer Wakatsuki. From there, he watches his most advanced carrier burn. The fire is not done. The first explosion was the ignition, and now the ship settles into a slow, consuming fire as fuel from the cracked tanks feeds it, munitions cook off, and seawater pours through the torn sides. The most heavily protected carrier the Imperial Navy ever built is burning from the inside. At 1628, a second violent explosion racks the hull, and the Taihō, Japan's newest fleet carrier, the most protected warship the Imperial Navy ever built, goes down stern first at coordinates 12 degrees 20 minutes north, 138 degrees 30 minutes east, as the Philippine Sea closes over her. Of the 2,150 men aboard, 1,650 are lost, killed in the blast, and the fire or gone down with the ship. The casualty lists record 500 survivors. The Taihō's designers had armored her against bombs and torpedoes, and had given her a flight deck that could take a hit and keep launching planes. What they had not designed was a way to clear fuel vapor from an enclosed hangar when the ventilation system became the problem. The crew, opening every duct and lowering every elevator, had built the bomb themselves, and a spark from a generator lit it. The carrier's loss is the end of a model. The Japanese carrier air arm, already battered after the morning's air battles, has now lost its flagship and its most survivable platform. Admiral Ozawa watches from the bridge of a destroyer. The full extent of the defeat becomes clear only in the hours ahead, as the surviving ships steam away from the largest carrier battle in history, having lost it. The Philippine Sea closes over the wreck, and what it closes over is the end of a capability. By the time the second explosion tears through Taihō, the combined fleet has already lost Shokaku, and Hio will follow. 3 fleet carriers gone, not to massed air attack, not to a decisive surface action, but to submarine torpedoes and the internal detonation of accumulated vapor. The Japanese carrier air arm, the force that opened the Pacific War, has been gutted. The battle the Americans call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot is a strategic erasure. 445 experienced aircrew are lost, and the Imperial Japanese Navy cannot replace them. Not quickly, not ever. So you end up with a navy that still has hulls, still has guns, still has admirals, but no longer has a functional carrier striking force. What follows over the next 9 months follows from that. A fleet without air cover cannot contest the next invasion, nor can it protect the supply lines from the southern resource zones. It cannot stop B-29s from finding bases within range of Tokyo. The loss of Saipan in July makes that last point immediate. The bombers get their runway. Hideki Tojo, the prime minister who launched this war, is forced to resign, his government falling with the inner defense perimeter, and for the first time the Japanese public is told the war is not going well. Yet the Philippines are next, and the combined fleet, crippled as it is, must respond. But respond with what? The carriers that remain are shells, Pilots are scarce and trained mechanics scarcer, and the Americans are coming in October. What the Japanese Navy drafts instead is a desperate surface plan. A gamble to lure Halsey's carriers north with a decoy force of carriers stripped almost bare of aircraft, while battleships and cruisers knife into the landing zone. It is the kind of plan you write when you have run out of real options. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in history, involving over 200,000 personnel, nearly all remaining major vessels are committed and lost. The Japanese Navy will never sail in comparable force again. Midway broke the offensive spine of the Kido Butai, the Philippine Sea dismantled the remnants and left the carrier a non-factor in Japan's order of battle, and the surface fleet in a role it could not survive. And the ship at the center of it was Taihō, the armored flagship built to absorb punishment and keep fighting. It absorbed one torpedo. What killed it wasn't American bombs or overwhelming combat damage, but a design that trapped vapor in an enclosed hangar and aviation fuel tanks positioned below the waterline, where one rupture turned seawater into a fuel-air mixture. It was a crew untrained in the foam suppression protocols that might have stopped the chain reaction. It was a ventilation system, switched to full, that distributed the explosive atmosphere into every corner of the ship. The evidence points to a preventable industrial disaster, not a glorious last stand. The armor specs didn't lie. The ship could shrug off hits from above. Armor doesn't matter when the threat rises from inside and waits for an electric contact to close. The casualty lists for Taihō include many of the 601st Naval Air Group, the air group meant to spearhead the decisive battle. And that empty Philippine Sea is not just the aftermath of a sinking. It is the road to Leyte Gulf and the final destruction of the surface fleet. The age of the Japanese carrier ended inside a vapor-filled hangar.